I never thought I would find myself in a situation where a grown woman, my husband's mother, the CEO of a company with a 20-year history, a person I had known for 6 years, would strike me across the face at a business meeting in front of 23 employees, with the conference room doors wide open, with the projector still glowing behind us, frozen on a slide of quarterly figures, and with the kind of silence that followed so thick and so total that I could hear my own breathing and nothing else. My name is Alina Sokolova, Vetrova before I married, 32 years old, chief financial officer of the holding company Progress Group, which my father-in-law Gennady Borisovich Sokolov founded 22 years ago. He built it from nothing, from a small wholesale warehouse in an industrial zone on the outskirts of Yekaterinburg, through 2 financial crises, through years of 12-hour days and decisions that kept him awake at night. He built something real, something that employed over 400 people, operated across 5 regions, and turned a profit that most companies in this industry would be quietly envious of. 3 years ago, on the advice of his cardiologists, who used the words stress reduction with the gentle firmness of people who have said the same thing too many times to too many stubborn men, Gennady Borisovich transferred operational management to the board of directors and stepped back. He remained the principal shareholder, holding 81% of the company's shares. He simply stopped coming to the conference rooms. The person who stepped into the CEO chair after him was Nina Alexandrovna, my mother-in-law, his wife, the mother of my husband, Anton, a woman I had first met when I was 26 years old, sitting in her kitchen at a Sunday dinner, drinking tea from her good porcelain, trying to say the right things and make the right impression, while she looked at me with an evaluating stillness that I told myself, at the time, was just a mother's natural caution about the woman in her son's life. 6 years later, I understood that the evaluating look had never left. It had simply moved from her kitchen to our conference room and made itself at home there. I joined the company not because I was Anton's wife. This is important to say clearly, and I want to say it first because everything that follows depends on it being understood. I was hired because I graduated with honors from the Ural State University of Economics, because I spent 3 years as an auditor at one of the Big Four firms, where I learned that numbers do not lie, but people who present them sometimes do. And because Gennady Borisovich, who conducted my final interview personally in his office on the 4th floor, with his jacket off and his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, looked at me across the desk at the end of an hour-long conversation and said, "Alina, you are exactly the person I need for this position. Not my son's girlfriend, not as a favor to the family. Exactly the person." I remembered that phrase for 6 years. I held on to it in difficult moments the way you hold on to something small and solid when the ground feels unsteady. Nina Alexandrovna was not pleased by my arrival. This was visible from the first day. Not crudely, not in ways that could be pointed to and named in a conversation with HR, but in that particular refined way that is impossible to prove and impossible not to feel. Answers to my questions that were slightly shorter than answers to the same questions from other people. Pauses before agreeing with my proposals that lasted a beat too long. Meetings I was invited to last when I should have been among the first. Decisions made without my involvement that I learned about after the fact. Not all decisions, just certain ones. Precisely the ones where my participation would have been professionally obvious and appropriate. Small things, each one alone. Nothing. All of them together over time. A system. My response to this system was to work. I closed 3 loss-making divisions that had been draining the company for 5 years. I restructured the finance department, eliminated 2 redundant positions, and closed 2 significant gaps in the budgeting process that no one had properly addressed because no one had wanted to be the person who found them. I negotiated new credit terms with the company's 3 main banking partners, terms that were materially better than anything the company had held in its history. Gennady Borisovich called me roughly once a month. He asked how things were going, listened to my answers with genuine attention, and occasionally said good work in the quiet way of someone who means it without needing to perform it. Those calls mattered to me. Not as approval, which I did not need from him, but as confirmation that I was reading the company correctly, that my instincts were sound, that I was where I was supposed to be. Nina Alexandrovna knew about those calls, not because I mentioned them. Anton sometimes spoke of them at home, the way married people share the small details of their days, and the information traveled the short distance to her. She knew, and I have thought about this many times, that this was one of the primary reasons the system remained a system rather than evolving into something better or fading away into ordinary professional coexistence. Anton existed in all of this in a separate space, not because he did not see what was happening, but because he saw it and did not know what to do with what he saw. Anton loved his mother. Anton loved me. He was a genuinely capable person in his professional domain. He ran the commercial division and ran it well, with real intelligence and real results. But in the specific territory where family and work intersected and created conflict, Anton had adopted the position of careful neutrality. I understood this position intellectually. I understood that it came from a real place, that he was caught between two people he loved, and that there was no clean move available to him. I did not blame him entirely, but in private, in the quiet moments when I was honest with myself, I knew that neutrality in the face of ongoing unfairness is also a choice. It is just a different kind of choice from speaking up, and it has a different kind of cost. The meeting I am about to describe was a regular monthly operational review. Every first Tuesday of the month, the conference room on the third floor, 23 people, heads of all divisions, their deputies, and Nina Alexandrovna at the head of the table. I sat in my usual place, third chair on the left from the end, across from Kirill Vadimovich from the legal department, a careful man of 50 who had worked at the company for 14 of those years and who had the particular stillness of someone who has learned to read rooms very accurately. Anton was to my right, with one chair between us. He had arrived late, slipping in at the midpoint of the meeting, because he had a parallel session with external partners that had run long. The agenda was the same as every month: results, variances, forward projections, operational flags. I was presenting the finance block report, quarterly figures, revenue forecast, and a cash flow gap we had identified in one of the subsidiaries the previous week. I was presenting clearly and factually. Here are the numbers. Here is the identified cause. Here are 3 resolution options. Here is my recommendation. Standard professional reporting. The kind of thing I had done in this room and rooms like it dozens of times. Nina Alexandrovna interrupted me at the midpoint. "Alina Mikhailovna," she said. Her voice had that particular formal quality that means something informal is coming. This shortfall exists because your finance team does not exercise adequate oversight of cash flow in the subsidiary structure. This is a systemic failure of your department. I responded calmly. Nina Alexandrovna, the shortfall is a direct result of the early repayment decision made at the board level in July, which was executed without finance department involvement. The documentation exists. I can present it now if that would be helpful. "We do not need documentation," she said. The temperature in the room shifted. I felt it before I consciously registered it, a tightening of the air. "We need people to do their jobs rather than distributing blame." "I'm not distributing blame," I said, keeping my voice level. "I'm identifying the cause so we can solve the problem correctly." "You are contradicting me. I am providing facts." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when 23 people simultaneously stop moving. I felt it behind me, in my peripheral vision, in my fingertips. Nina Alexandrovna stood. She moved along the length of the table, slowly, deliberately, with the unhurried confidence of someone who is not concerned about what happens next because she has already decided what that will be. I watched her approach, and I thought, she is going to say something sharp. A public reprimand, the kind that stings and is meant to. It had happened before. Rarely, but it had happened. I was ready for words. I was not ready for what happened. She reached my chair, and in the next instant, A short, sharp movement, an open palm, a strike across my cheek. Not hard enough to knock me sideways, not violent in the physical sense of the word, but hard enough that my cheek burned instantly, hard enough that my head moved, hard enough that the shock of it closed my throat for a full second and erased every thought I had been in the middle of having. The silence became total. I did not move. I sat in my chair, and I did not move. Not because I was frozen, but because in the first seconds my mind was doing something specific. It was deciding. It was quietly and very quickly sorting through everything that was available to me in this moment and determining what the correct next action was. Crying was available to me. Standing up and leaving the room was available to me. Shouting was available to me. All of these were understandable responses. None of them were the right one. Nina Alexandrovna stood above me. Her voice was composed, almost conversational, the voice of someone who has done something ordinary and is waiting for the room to catch up. Perhaps now you will remember not to speak over your seniors. I raised my eyes to her, slowly. I looked at her directly and I saw something in her expression that I will not forget. It was not anger. Anger had been there before the strike. What I saw now was something closer to satisfaction. A demonstration completed, a message sent. 23 people had witnessed it, and that was, I understood in that moment, exactly the point. 23 people had witnessed it. I looked down at the table. I drew one breath, then another. Something cold and very clear was arranging itself in a line inside me, simple and straight. I was not thinking about what had just happened. I was thinking about what I was going to do in the next 2 minutes. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and took out my phone. I opened my contacts. I found the name, Gennady Borisovich. I pressed call. Nina Alexandrovna watched this, and a small, dismissive sound came from her. Not quite a laugh. Something more like amusement. She turned slightly toward the room as she said it, making sure she was heard. She's calling to complain to her husband. A murmur moved through the far end of the table. Someone shifted in their chair. I said nothing. The call was connecting. 3 rings. 4. Gennady Borisovich answered after the 5th. His voice calm and domestic, carrying the mild surprise of a man receiving a midday call he had not anticipated. Alina, has something happened? Gennady Borisovich, I said. My voice did not shake. I want to be honest about this. It did not shake, not because I was not shaken, but because some part of me had decided, before the first word left my mouth, that this was not a moment for shaking. During the operational meeting this morning, Nina Alexandrovna struck me in front of 23 employees of the company. I am requesting that you make a decision regarding her immediate removal from the position of General Director. Silence on the line. 3 seconds. Perhaps 4. In those seconds, Nina Alexandrovna was still wearing the expression of a woman who is watching something she finds faintly amusing. She was certain I was calling my husband. She had calculated this as a manageable situation. The daughter-in-law calling Anton, Anton being caught between wife and mother, the usual negotiation following, everything eventually settling back into its familiar shape. She had done this calculation, and she was confident in it. Then Gennady Borisovich said, "Who is in the conference room right now?" "The full operational council, 23 people. Put me on speaker," he said. I pressed the speakerphone button and placed the phone on the table. His voice filled the conference room. Not loud, Gennady Borisovich had never needed volume to be heard, but it filled the room in the way that a particular quality of voice fills a room, completely, without resistance, leaving no space for anything else. "Good morning. This is Sokolov. I am asking everyone present to serve as witnesses to the following. Nina Alexandrovna Sokolova is removed from the duties of General Director of Progress Group effective this moment. The basis for this decision is the use of physical force against a company employee during working hours in the presence of witnesses. Kirill Vadimovich, please prepare the documentation for this removal by the end of the business day today. Alina, are you all right?" "I am all right," I said. "Good," he said. Call me later. The line went quiet. The conference room was silent. Nina Alexandrovna stood at the end of the table, and I watched her face change. Not all at once. Not the way a light goes off when you flip a switch, but the way color drains from something slowly and then cannot be recovered. The half-smile disappeared first, then the composure around her eyes, then the color in her face itself. She looked at the phone on the table, then at me, then at the phone again. Her mouth opened slightly and then closed. "This," she began. "Kirill Vadimovich," I said without looking at her, addressing him directly across the table. "What time should I expect the documentation to be ready?" Kirill Vadimovich, who had worked at this company for 14 years, who had sat in more difficult meetings than most people have hot dinners, who I had never once seen look genuinely thrown, cleared his throat with the careful precision of a man choosing his ground. "By end of business, Alina Mikhailovna, without question." "Thank you." I picked up my phone, returned it to my jacket pocket, picked up my pen, and looked back at my notes. We were discussing the cash flow gap. Option 1 involves an internal reallocation from the Western regional budget, which would address the immediate shortfall without requiring external financing, but would delay the Q4 distribution timeline by approximately... I do not think that conference room had ever been so quiet in its entire existence. I want to be honest about something, because honesty matters here more than the appearance of total composure. When I describe what I did, the calm, the phone call, the even voice, the return to the agenda, I do not want it to read as the story of a woman who felt nothing. I felt everything. My cheek was burning. There was a tremor in my right hand that I pressed flat against the table where no one could see it. I was aware, in a sharp and physical way, of every person in that room and of exactly what each of them had just witnessed. I was aware of Anton 2 seats to my right, pale and motionless, and I was deliberately not looking at him, because if I had looked at him, I might have lost the thread of what I needed to do. What I knew, what I had understood somewhere in those first silent seconds after the strike, was this. I had 6 years of small things that could be argued, minimized, contextualized, and explained away. What I had now was one thing that could not be argued or minimized or explained at all by anyone in front of 23 witnesses. If there was ever a moment to use the one resource that had always existed but that I had never reached for, the direct line to the man who owned 81% of this company and who had told me 6 years ago that I was exactly the person he needed, this was that moment. Not from revenge, not from anger, though the anger was real and present and burning in my face, but because some lines, once crossed, changed the geometry of everything, and the geometry had changed. After the meeting ended, how we finished the remaining agenda items I can tell you only in broad strokes because my memory of the last 40 minutes is hazy at the edges. I found myself at the elevator at the end of the hallway. I was looking at the floor indicator above the doors without really seeing it. I heard footsteps behind me and I knew before I turned that it was Anton. He looked the way a person looks when something structural has shifted inside them and they are standing in the first moments of understanding how much has shifted. Pale, quiet, his hands in his pockets. "Alina," he said. I turned to face him. "I should have..." He stopped, started again. "I didn't..." Stopped again. I watched him realize that every version of that sentence was wrong in the same fundamental way, that any ending he chose would be an attempt to describe an absence that could not be justified by describing it. "Anton," I said quietly, "I'm not angry with you. I understand that you were in shock, but we need to talk tonight. At home, properly, about everything." "Everything," he repeated. It wasn't a question, but it had the shape of one. 6 years, I said. "What happened today? What comes next? All of it." He nodded. Once, slowly, the nod of someone who recognizes an inevitable conversation and begins preparing for it in real time. I stepped into the elevator alone. Nina Alexandrovna called me at 3 in the afternoon. 2 hours after the meeting, while I was at my desk working through the subsidiary cash flow analysis, because the problem still existed regardless of what had happened that morning, and it still needed solving. Her name appeared on my screen, and I looked at it for a long moment before answering. Alina. Her voice was not the voice from the conference room. The certainty was gone. What remained was something I had not heard from her in 6 years, possibly ever, a person speaking without the armor on. We need to talk. All right, I said, I'm listening. Not on the phone. Come to the house this evening. She meant the Sokolov family home in the Shirokaya Rechka district, a large house that Gennady Borisovich had built in the years when the company was first becoming successful. The house Anton had grown up in. The house where I had first sat at her kitchen table and drunk tea from her good porcelain and tried to say the right things. I knew that house the way you know a place you have visited regularly for years. Its particular smell, the way the light came through the front windows in the late afternoon, the sound of the stairs. I'll be there at 6, I said. Gennady Borisovich was not home when I arrived. He had left deliberately. I understood this the moment Nina Alexandrovna opened the door herself. She was in her home clothes, not her work ones, no makeup. She looked older than usual, but not in any way that I would call diminished. In the way that people look when they have taken off something they have been wearing for a long time and they are standing in front of you as they actually are. We sat in the kitchen. She made tea. The silence before either of us spoke was long enough to be its own kind of conversation. I should not have done that, she said at last. Not, I'm sorry. That particular formulation, slightly more complex, slightly more precise. Not an apology performed for the benefit of a listener, but a statement of fact directed at herself. It was wrong. It was wrong, I agreed. Nothing added. Another silence. She looked into her cup. Gennady will finalize the decision. I am not asking you to reverse it. I couldn't reverse it if I wanted to, I said. It was his decision to make, not mine. I asked. He decided. I know. She looked up. You are a smart woman, Alina. You always were. I knew it from the first time we met. That was the problem. This was, I believe, the most honest thing Nina Alexandrovna had ever said to me directly. I sat across from her and thought about the particular cruelty of truth that arrives 6 years late. Too late for some things, but perhaps not for everything. Nina Alexandrovna, I said, I was never your enemy. I have never been your enemy. I came here to do a job and I did it. I know, she said quietly. I know that. We finished our tea in a silence that was not hostile. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door and stood in the frame watching me go. I didn't look back, but I felt that look. Not sharp, not pursuing. Just a look. The kind that belongs to someone who is working out where the last 6 years went and cannot quite find the answer. Anton and I talked that night for a long time. Longer than we had talked, I think, in the previous 2 years combined. We sat at the kitchen table as the evening became night and the tea went cold in our cups, and we talked about all of it. The 6 years of small things, his neutrality and what it had cost, not only me but us, the morning, what I had done and why, what he had not done and why, what came next. He listened in a way I had not seen from him in a long time, without preparing his defense, without softening what I was saying by interpreting it charitably before I had finished saying it. He just listened. When I was done, he was quiet for a while. Then he said, I should have stood up this morning. The moment it happened, I should have been on my feet. I didn't do that. That's on me, not on you. Anton, no, let me finish. He looked at me steadily. I spent 6 years telling myself that staying in the middle was the fair thing, that I was protecting both of you by not taking sides, but that's not what I was doing. I was protecting myself from a conversation I didn't want to have. That's not neutrality. That's just a different kind of cowardice, with better justifications. I looked at him across the table. These were not words he had said before, not because he was dishonest, but because they required a particular moment and a particular readiness. The moment had come. The readiness was there. "I hear you," I said quietly. "What do you want to happen now?" he asked. "With everything." I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I want to keep working. I want you actually present. Not as a neutral party, but as my husband who is on my side when my side is the right one. And I want to find out whether there is any version of a real relationship possible with your mother. Not warmth on day one. Honesty. Starting from the beginning." "Do you think that's possible?" "I don't know," I told him. "But tonight, at her kitchen table, I saw something in her that I hadn't seen before. Whether something can grow from that, I can't tell you. But I think it's worth finding out." Anton reached across the table and took my hand. Just held it. We sat in the dark kitchen with the cold tea and the quiet apartment around us and didn't say anything for a while. "She was wrong," he said finally. "Everything she did for 6 years. And today." "Yes," I said. "And you were right to call him." "Yes," I said again. That second yes was the simplest and most important word of the entire day. Gennady Borisovich called early the next morning, before 7:30, while I was still waiting for the coffee to finish. "Alina, how are you?" First question, before anything about the company or the documents or the next steps. "How are you?" "I'm all right," I said. "Thank you for picking up yesterday." "If you had called me 12 years ago with something like this, I would have picked up then too," he said. "But you didn't call. You worked and you endured. I thought I could handle it on my own." "You did handle it," he said, "in your own way. But sometimes handling something means asking the person who can actually do something about it." I stood at the kitchen window with my phone and looked at the October morning outside. Yekaterinburg gray and early, the first snow sitting on the rooftops in thin white lines. I thought about what he had said and recognized it as true, that there is a particular kind of stubbornness that dresses itself as strength, the refusal to ask for help, the insistence on solving everything within the boundaries of your own resources, and that sometimes the actually strong move is the one that recognizes where the real leverage is and uses it without apology. "What happens to the company?" I asked. "The company continues," he said with the complete calm of a man who has been through more difficult things than this and knows it. "It has a good CFO. We'll name an interim from the board. Then we'll see." "We'll see," I repeated. "Alina," he said, "what you did yesterday was right. I know it wasn't easy." "It wasn't," I said honestly. "I know," he said. "That's exactly why I'm saying it." We said goodbye. I poured the coffee. Outside, Yekaterinburg was waking up, brightening, moving, filling with the ordinary noise of an ordinary morning that happened to be following a very extraordinary day. There were questions still ahead. There were conversations still to be had, with Nina Alexandrovna, with the board, with Anton over time, with myself in quiet moments. None of it was resolved cleanly. None of it would be. But I was standing in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and the morning was honest. For the first time in 6 years, completely, uncomplicatedly honest. The documentation removing Nina Alexandrovna from the position of general director was ready by 5:40 in the afternoon on the day of the meeting. Kirill Vadimovich delivered it personally to my office, placed it on my desk without comment, and left with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that some moments do not require words. I signed as a witness. Gennady Borisovich signed remotely via the company's secure document system, within 20 minutes of receiving the file. By 6 o'clock that evening, it was official. I sat alone in my office for a while after everyone had left. The building had that particular after-hours stillness, the air conditioning cycling down, the distant sound of the cleaning staff somewhere on the floor below, the city outside the windows going from afternoon gray to evening gray. I looked at the signed documents on my desk and felt something I had not expected to feel. Not triumph, not relief exactly, but something quieter and more complicated. The feeling of a door that had been standing open for 6 years, finally, irrevocably closing. You spend a long time bracing against a wind, and then the wind stops, and the absence of it is its own kind of adjustment. The following days were professionally intense in the specific way that power transitions in companies always are. Not dramatic, not loud, but dense with small decisions that collectively determine what the next chapter looks like. The board convened an emergency session on Thursday. Gennady Borisovich joined by video call from his home office, looking healthy and composed, and not at all like a man who had made a difficult decision 2 days prior. The interim general director appointed was Pavel Semyonovich Grachev, head of operations, 51 years old, 20 years with the company, a man with the particular gift of being trusted equally by the old guard and the newer senior staff. It was a good choice. I said so when asked, and I meant it. My own position was not discussed at that session because there was nothing to discuss. I was the CFO, I remained the CFO. My work spoke for itself and had been speaking for itself for 3 years. But I was aware, in the days that followed, of a shift in how people related to me in the hallways, in the brief exchanges before meetings started, in the way colleagues who had previously maintained a careful professional distance were now somewhat less careful about it. I do not think this was about the phone call itself, or not only about that. I think it was about what the phone call revealed, that I had been in this company doing serious work for 3 years, that the principal shareholder trusted me enough to act immediately on my word, and that I had not, even in the most extreme provocation, lost my composure or behaved in a way that could be criticized. People notice these things. They file them away. Valentina from HR came to my office on Friday afternoon. She was a careful woman in her mid-40s who had worked at the company since before Anton was born and who had the institutional memory of someone who has outlasted several management regimes and survived by being professionally indispensable and personally discreet. She knocked, came in, closed the door behind her. That particular sequence of actions that signals a conversation of a different register from the routine. "Alina Mikhailovna," she said, sitting down across from me, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to know that I'm saying it as a colleague and not in any official capacity." "All right," I said. "What happened on Tuesday was not the first time." She held my gaze steadily. There were 2 incidents in previous years, with employees who are no longer with the company. Neither was documented. Both people were encouraged to view the situation as a misunderstanding and to move on. I should have documented them. I did not, because the pressure not to was significant, and I made the wrong choice. I am telling you this now because you deserve to know it, and because I intend to write a full account and place it in the personnel file before the end of next week. I looked at her for a moment. How many people know about the previous incidents? 4, including myself. 1 left the company 2 years ago. 1 is still here, in marketing, 2nd floor. "Thank you for telling me," I said. I mean that genuinely. She nodded, stood, and left with the same quiet efficiency with which she had arrived. I turned back to my window and sat with this new piece of information. 2 previous incidents. 2 people who had been pressed into silence. The system I had spent 6 years observing in its professional form had a physical dimension I had not known about, and the fact that I had not known told me something about how carefully it had been managed. I called Gennady Borisovich that afternoon and told him what Valentina had shared with me. He was quiet on the line for longer than his usual pauses. When he spoke, his voice had something in it I had not heard before. Not anger, but a specific kind of heaviness that belongs to a man confronting information about someone he loves that he cannot unknow. "I'll handle it," he said. "Thank you for telling me." "Are you all right?" I asked, the same question he had asked me on Wednesday morning. A brief silence. Then, "I will be." He paused again. "She is my wife, Alina. I am not going to pretend that this is simple for me." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you to pretend that." "But it doesn't change what was right," he said. "And it doesn't change what I decided." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." Nina Alexandrovna did not come to the office after Tuesday. This was, I was told by Kirill Vadimovich in the careful language of corporate formality, consistent with the terms of the transition arrangement. What this meant in practice was that the physical removal of her presence from the building happened gradually and almost invisibly. Her name taken off the door of the CEO's office one morning, her parking space quietly reassigned, her access credentials deactivated in the system with the kind of administrative tidiness that companies perform when they want to minimize the optics of a departure. I did not feel satisfaction at any of this. I want to be honest about that too. There is a version of this story in which the woman who was wronged watches the wrongdoer fall and feels the clean pleasure of justice properly delivered. That version is emotionally satisfying and narratively neat, and it is not what I felt. What I felt was more like the aftermath of a storm. Things were changed, some things were broken, the air was cleared, and you stand in the quiet afterward and take stock of what is still standing. What was still standing? The company, functioning and stable under its interim leadership, my work continuing and uninterrupted, my marriage more honestly than it had been in a long time, with the kind of honesty that is uncomfortable in the way of something true, and, unexpectedly, the beginning of something with Nina Alexandrovna that I had not anticipated and would not have predicted. She called me 10 days after the meeting, not to the house this time. She asked if I would meet her for coffee, somewhere neutral, away from both the family home and the office. I chose a small place near the river that I liked for reasons that had nothing to do with any of this. Good coffee, good light in the mornings, tables far enough apart for a private conversation. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her hands around a cup, looking out at the street. Without the executive context, without the conference room, the head of the table, the CEO's authority arranged around her like furniture, she looked like a woman in her late 50s, sitting alone in a cafe, which was exactly what she was. I sat down across from her. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Of course," I said. The conversation that followed was one of the more unusual I have had in my adult life, not because of what was said, but because of the quality of its honesty, which was the kind that arrives only after the structures that prevented it have been dismantled. Nina Alexandrovna did not perform remorse. She did not go through the motions of an apology designed to achieve a specific outcome. She talked, slowly, sometimes with long pauses, sometimes restarting a sentence when she found the first version was not quite right, about what she had been afraid of for 6 years and why that fear had expressed itself the way it did. She had been afraid, she said, that I would diminish her, not professionally, not in any concrete operational sense, but in the way that a person who has defined themselves by a role can be diminished by someone who is better suited to a version of that role. She had built her identity, she told me, over 20 years, around being the person Gennady Borisovich needed, the person the company needed, the irreplaceable one. And then I had appeared, young and credentialed and competent, and Gennady Borisovich had said, during a Sunday dinner 3 years ago that she described in precise detail, "Alina sees things in those numbers that I missed for 10 years. He had said it with admiration, the uncomplicated admiration of a man recognizing good work, and something in her, she said, had heard it as a verdict. "I knew it was irrational," she said. "I knew you weren't trying to take anything from me. You were just doing your job. But knowing something is irrational doesn't always stop it from shaping how you behave." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. I watched you work," she said, "and you were good. You kept being good, and I kept waiting for you to be wrong about something, to make a mistake that would let me feel—" She stopped, started again. "It wasn't generous of me." "No," I said. "It wasn't. I am sorry, Alina." This time the apology came without the formal distancing, without the "I should not have done that" construction. Just the direct statement, plain and uncovered. For the 6 years, not only for Tuesday, for all of it. I looked at her across the small table. Outside the window, the river moved in the October light, gray-green and slow. I thought about what I wanted to say, not what was polite, not what was strategically wise, but what was honest. "I accept your apology," I said. "I want to be clear that accepting it doesn't erase what happened. The 6 years were real, and they had real costs. To me, to my work, to my marriage, in ways I'm still sorting out. I'm not going to tell you that it's all fine now because it isn't all fine. But I believe you when you say you're sorry. And I think, if both of us choose to, there might be something possible between us that's been impossible until now. She looked at me steadily. Why would you want that? After everything? Because Anton loves you, I said simply. And I love Anton. And because I think you are a more complicated person than the one I've been dealing with for 6 years. And I'm interested in knowing that person. I paused. Also, because I've been in this family for 6 years, and I'm tired of having a mother-in-law I'm at war with. I would prefer not to be at war. Something shifted in her expression. Small, but real. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. You are very direct. I've been told that, I said. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know how to do this, she said. A different kind of relationship with you. I don't know what it looks like. Neither do I said honestly. But I think we start here, with a cup of coffee and an honest conversation, and then we see. We stayed for another hour. We talked about things we had never talked about. Not work, not Anton, not Gennady Borisovich, or the company, or any of the territory we had shared for 6 years. She talked about growing up in a small city in the Urals, about her own mother who had been exacting and difficult, and whom she had spent 30 years trying to satisfy. I talked about my father, who had died when I was 19, and about how his absence had shaped the specific brand of self-sufficiency that I had brought into every room I had walked into since. We were 2 women having coffee by a river, learning things about each other that 6 years of proximity had somehow never revealed. When we left, she touched my arm briefly at the door, a small, tentative gesture, the kind that asks rather than assumes. I did not pull away. The months that followed were not easy, but they were honest in a way that I had not known the preceding years to be. Anton and I went through a period that I would describe as deliberate. We were deliberate with each other, attentive in a way that had been absent, careful about the small acts of presence that sustain a marriage over time. We argued sometimes about the things we had been not arguing about for years, and these arguments were uncomfortable and necessary and ultimately useful in the way that clearing a blocked pipe is useful. The process is unpleasant, and the result is that things flow. He apologized to me properly on a Sunday evening in November in our kitchen with the lights low and the first real winter outside the window. Not the abbreviated acknowledgement from the night of the meeting, a full accounting of what he had chosen not to see and not to say, and what that had meant. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I told him what I needed going forward, not as a list of demands, but as honest information, the kind you give someone you trust enough to be honest with. He listened the same way I had. We sat with it for a while. Then he made dinner, and we ate it together, and that was, in its quiet, unremarkable way, its own kind of restoration. Professionally, the company steadied under Pavel Semyonovich's interim leadership with the resilience of an organization that has good bones and good people at its operational core. The board met formally in December and confirmed the appointment of a permanent CEO. Not Pavel Semyonovich, who had made clear he preferred operations to executive administration, but an external candidate who had spent 15 years in regional manufacturing leadership and who came with both strong references and the useful quality of having no pre-existing allegiances within the company. I liked him immediately, which surprised me slightly, and I found in the months that followed that working under a CEO who had no personal agenda regarding my presence was a different professional experience than I had known for 3 years. Not easier exactly. He was demanding in the way that good leaders are demanding, but clean. There was a cleanliness to it. Valentina filed her written account of the 2 previous incidents, as she had said she would. The documentation went into the personnel archive and into Gennady Borisovich's private files. It would not become a legal matter. The employees involved had moved on with their lives, and neither wished to revisit it. But it existed. It was on record. This mattered to me in a way I found difficult to articulate precisely, but which I think has something to do with the difference between things that happened and things that are known to have happened. The former can be managed and minimized. The latter cannot. The last thing I want to tell is small, and it is the one I think about most. In February, 4 months after the meeting, Nina Alexandrovna called me on a Thursday evening. Not about anything urgent, not about the company, not about Anton. She called to tell me that she had started working with a therapist. She said it in the particular way of someone who is sharing something that has cost them something to share, and who is sharing it anyway, because they have decided that honesty matters more than the appearance of having always been fine. "I thought you should know," she said. "I'm not telling you because I want credit for it. I'm telling you because you said you wanted honesty. This is part of honesty." "Thank you for telling me," I said. "She's very direct," Nina Alexandrovna added after a brief pause. "The therapist, annoyingly direct." "The good ones are," I said. A short silence. Then, to my considerable surprise, she laughed. It was a real laugh, small, a little rueful, fully human. The laugh of a woman who can finally find something slightly absurd about her own situation. I laughed too. It was not the resolution of everything. There is no such thing as the resolution of everything. There is only the ongoing work of being honest with the people in your life and showing up for that work even when it is uncomfortable and allowing time to do what only time can do. There would be more difficult conversations. There would be moments of backsliding and moments of unexpected grace. There would be Sundays at the family house that were easier than the ones before, and probably some that were not easy at all. But something had changed. Not the way things change in stories, cleanly, completely, with a clear before and after. The way things change in real life, slowly, unevenly, with setbacks and silences, and small incremental movements in a direction that might, eventually, be called forward. I'd walked into a conference room one Tuesday morning as a financial director presenting a quarterly report, and I had come out the other side of that day as something slightly different. Not a different person. The same person, with the same values, the same stubbornness, the same habit of pressing flat the shaking hand where no one can see it, but a person who had learned something about the difference between enduring and acting, about when the right move is to absorb and when the right move is to reach for the phone, about the fact that asking for help from the person who actually has the power to help is not weakness. It is sometimes exactly the right kind of strength.